So good evening. Good to see you. I see there'll be some other people joining us in the following minutes. So as we have been doing, let's begin with a recitation of the Heart of Wisdom Sutra, the Heart Sutra, which Sheila will put up there. And somehow I'm obscured from seeing everything. There we go. There we go. Okay. So this is a rendition of the events taken place on Vulture's Peak when the Buddha taught this very short, abbreviated Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, sort of a discourse on wisdom. There's even a shorter version. When you talk about this is usually thought of very short one that the Japanese even put on their neckties or little amulets and so forth. There's a shorter Perfection of Wisdom Sutra called the Perfection of Wisdom in one syllable. It's not that the whole the sutra has some other words in it, but the one syllable is ah. The Sanskrit letter ah as a prefix can mean non, or it's a negating particle, like we say, non or un or something like that. So when we talk about selflessness and emptiness, we talk about non-inherently existent, sort of like that. But anyway, we're going to begin here. And if you move up just a little bit, so you start with thus where did I hear at one time? Okay. Thus did I hear at one time, the Bhagavan was dwelling on massive Vulture's Mountain. And there, I have to move this out of the way. In Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, the Arya Avalokiteshvara, looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara. How should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Sharidvati Putra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feelings, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness. There is no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on, up to and including no mind element, and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, Bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the endpoint of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly, completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared, Tadyata, Gate, Gate, Paragate, Parasamgati, Bodhi, Svaha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom, just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharidvatiputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagavan. Thank you. So, good to see you. Just looking over the people, some people have just joined. So, before we begin, are there any questions from last time? Any burning questions that you'd like to have? Robert? Oh, Robert, you're the one from Quebec. Nice to see you. Thanks for coming. Everyone okay? Okay, so we are we're talking about the wisdom chapter of a text written by the fifth Dalai Lama. The text is called the Sacred Words of Manjushri, and this translation that we are using was done by Jeffrey Hopkins and Geshe Rapton many years ago, and published by the Library of Tibetan Works and Archives with the title Practice of Emptiness. That's not the text, not a name that the Dalai Lama, the fifth Dalai Lama, had chosen, but it's good in that it talks a lot about meditation and practice. So I wanted to just remind you a little bit about the fifth Dalai Lama who had written this text. He was in the era, he was born in 1617, died in 1682. And he was identified, his reincarnation, you know how in Tibet, lamas will identify some child as a reincarnation of a previous lama. He was recognized or identified by as the reincarnation of the fourth Dalai Lama by Lobsang Gyatso, who some of you who have listened to the courses that we've given before will remember was dubbed the first Pension Lama. Subsequently, he was recognized. There were three previous reincarnations of him that were recognized. We'll talk about that a little bit later also. So he was called the fourth Pension Lama. So he was identified by the fourth Pension Lama, or the first Pension Lama, who had been the tutor to the fourth Dalai Lama. So he had some connection, you know, so wanted to find the reincarnation of the fourth Dalai Lama. Much later, the fifth Dalai Lama, the author of our text, gave the title of Pension Lama to the person who had identified him, Lobsang Gyatso, who was called the first Pension Lama. So the fifth Dalai Lama's name was Ngawang Lobsang Gyatso. Ngawang. So Ngawang Lobsang Gyatso received his full ordination as a monk, bhikshu ordination in 1638, and was given the name or ordination name Nagi Wangchuk. Nagi means speech. Wangchuk means Lord, so sort of Lord of speech. He began construction among the many great deeds of the fifth Dalai Lama. He was called the Great Fifth because of so many enormously important things that took place while he was living. He began construction of the Potala Palace. Maybe anyone been to the Potala? Paul's been there many times. Sneh, you've been to the Potala? Anyone else?
Yes.
Jackie. Oh, Jackie Penn's been there. Okay. So he began that in 1645. Remember, he died in 1682, and it became his residence in 1649. His death in 1682 was concealed for almost 15 years. Some of you conspiracy theorists will like this, by his regent and his servant. People thought he was doing long retreats, and actually he'd already died. For 15 years, it was kept secret. So quite an amazing character. So we've talked about the beginning of the text, which you can get as a PDF. Robert, if you don't already have it, you can find it, the PDF of this text. So we'd gotten up to, maybe someone can remind me where about, what was the last thing we talked about last time? Anyone have a note there? Did you put in your text? Okay.
We ended with the question, what are the stages in the realization of the two types of emptiness?
Okay. Right. So on question, the text says, what are the stages in the realization of the two types of emptiness? Now, I've reformatted this again from the version you have. I have it on page 5, so it may be on a slightly different page on yours. And so there's a quotation from Aryadeva's 400 stanzas, or the 400. We talked about this last time. Initially, the non-meritorious is overcome. In the middle, self is overcome. And finally, all views are overcome. Whoever knows this is wise. So this is an answer to what are the stages of realization of the two types of emptiness. What are the two types of emptiness? Emptiness of persons and emptiness of phenomena. There's a slight difference in the Buddhist teachings, because in the very basic teachings that Buddha gave to the Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas, nowadays more or less what we call the Theravada, mainly just talked about selflessness of persons. Selflessness of phenomena was not really talked about. So Snehi has just posted, I guess, maybe Robert can see there the practice of emptiness text, I guess. So you can download that. So what does this mean? So when Aryadeva says, initially the non-meritorious is overcome. So that means in progressing toward understanding emptiness, you first have to have an understanding of the law of cause and effect, karma and its result. And you have to have observed that, keeping your mind away from negative actions, from delusions that bring about actions of body, speech, and mind. So that's what's meant by the non-meritorious is overcome. It's said, as we'll see later, I think there's a quotation coming, that it's not possible to develop an understanding of emptiness or selflessness in the mind of someone who does not believe in the law of cause and effect. Well, kind of makes some sense. If you're engaged in, if you don't believe in the law of cause and effect, anything you do, you think anything you do doesn't have any consequences, it's all empty or something like that, you will create conditions for your mind to be disturbed, not to be able to develop concentration, and develop many ideas that are antithetical to the correct view of emptiness. So that's what's meant. Initially, the non-meritorious is overcome. So the commentary to that says, bad views of no cause and effect and so forth were overcome earlier. So that means in the practices of the person of beginning scope and intermediate scope in the Lan Rim that came in earlier chapters of the text that we're reading. We're reading just the wisdom chapter, right? In the sections on beings of small and middling capacity. Therefore, it is said in a text that Nagarjuna wrote called the 60 Stanzas. Initially, and the translation that Jeffrey had didn't have the word initially there, but it's in the quotation. Initially, the source of all evil, nihilism, has been thoroughly overcome. You should do that from the beginning. So it's talking about what are the stages of developing realization of emptiness. First, you have to have a basis of understanding karma, the conventional reality of things. Then, in the middle, the text continues, a self of persons, and finally, a self of other phenomena should be overcome. So this is giving the sequence. Initially, you have to overcome the non-meritorious by understanding the law of cause and effect. You have to be able to control your behavior. Then you overcome a self of persons. That means you realize the selflessness of persons. And finally, the selflessness of phenomena. So the text is going to explain here a little bit about this, because generally speaking, from the highest philosophical viewpoint, selflessness of persons and selflessness of phenomena are equally subtle. So you might think, shouldn't be any difference which one you overcome first. Overcome means not overcoming selflessness, but overcoming the self, that is, overcoming the grasping to a self of persons, overcoming the grasping to a self of phenomena. In fact, in texts generally that talk about emptiness, generally they present the selflessness of phenomena first, and then talk about the selflessness of persons. But here the text says, then in the middle, a self of persons, and finally a self of other phenomena should be overcome. This order, wherein the selflessness of persons is cultivated before the selflessness of other phenomena, is devised in accordance with the precepts of practice. Whereas in the great books on the selflessness of other, in the great books on the selflessness, it looks like some word is missing in the translation here. In the great books on emptiness, the selflessness of other phenomena appear first. So usually they present the selflessness of phenomena, then the selflessness of persons. But in terms of realization, getting a taste of emptiness or selflessness, generally one has the first actual insight into selflessness with regard to one's own personal identity, overcoming the grasping to the self of one's own personal identity. This non-mistaken order, which, being for practice, is an exception to the general rule meaning that selflessness of phenomena is presented and the selflessness of persons, even though they're equally subtle. This is here, this non-mistaken order, which being for practice is an exception to the general rule, is an excellent essential. A view of selflessness cannot be generated in the continuum of a person who does not believe in cause and effect, meaning doesn't believe, not talking about cause and effect like Newtonian, the third law of motion or something like that, but talking about karma and its result. When it says cause, it means the karmic cause and its results or effects. A view of selflessness cannot be generated in the continuum of a person who does not believe in karma and its results, or does not believe in cause and effect. And if the conception of a self of persons is not overcome, the conception of a self of other phenomena cannot be overcome. So, a little bit interesting here, because as I said, from the Prasangika point of view, from the highest philosophical point of view, there's no difference in subtlety between the selflessness of persons and the selflessness of phenomena that are other than persons. Remember, selflessness of persons, when you talk about these two categories, persons, when you talk about selflessness of persons and selflessness of phenomena in that case doesn't include persons, although in general, persons are phenomena, right? They exist among objects of knowledge. But when you talk about this division, selflessness of persons only refers to the selflessness of oneself and the selflessness of other persons. The selflessness of phenomena in that dichotomy between selflessness of persons and selflessness of phenomena, selflessness of phenomena refers to everything else other than the selflessness of persons. So for instance, one's own aggregates, body, consciousness, compositional factors, feeling, discrimination, so forth, 5 aggregates that are mentioned in the Heart Sutra that we recited at the beginning. Each of those 5 aggregates are called phenomena in this discussion. And so you can meditate on the emptiness of those also. So as Avalokiteshvara says to Shariputra in the Heart Sutra, the Bodhisattvas meditate on the emptiness of the 5 aggregates also. So not just the emptiness of the person, the selflessness of the person, but also the selflessness of the basis for imputing the person. How are we doing? Make sense? I can't see everyone's face because I can't see if some people are squinting and scratching their head or. What is that? Lana Povicic. You put your thumb up, right?
Yes, Lana
Okay.
Popovich. Yes,
Okay.
yes, it's great. Thank you.
Okay, you go. Okay, just true. So, where do we go? So then the text continues. Through practices explained earlier in this book, and Jeffrey Hopkins puts in parentheses, but not translated here. It is talking about the beginning stages of the development of understanding, the path, what is called the stages of the path that the great teacher Atisha brought to Tibet from India, that Lama Tsongkhapa wrote in the stages of the path, the Lan Rim and so forth. Through the practices explained earlier in this book, but not translated here, the antidotes of the diverse afflictions, such as desire, have caused their corresponding faults to be eliminated in the sense of being suppressed. Do you understand what that means? Sheila, do you understand what that means? No? So, yeah. complicated words, but it's a simple idea. So when we talk about the afflictions, another way of calling them delusions, attachment, hatred, or should I say anger, ignorance, pride, afflicted doubt, the different kinds of wrong views and so forth. And then the secondary afflictions, belligerence and other kinds of states of mind. All of them are, in the Sanskrit word for them is klesha. Tibetans say nyonmong. So the basic characteristic of klesha, or afflictions, however you want to call them, or delusions, the basic characteristic is they disturb the calmness of the mind, and that's sort of their general characteristic. In general, the presence of afflictions in the mind can cause us to energize us into doing actions of body and speech and other actions of mind, generating other kind of distorted thoughts that create negative karma. Let me say, do all afflictions create negative karma? I think we talked about it before, but I can't remember. Paul, do all afflictions create negative karma?
I would think so.
Who would not think so? Kristen, what do you think? You're raising your hand?
No.
Oh, no. Wait.
No, but I would think not. So
Why not? What kind of affliction wouldn't create negative karma?
Well, if you don't have the intention and all those 4 qualities, if it's kind of accidental.
Well, those 4 qualities that you're thinking of are necessary to create throwing karma that will impel you into another life. So you can still create negative karma, but in general, the afflictions, not all the afflictions create negative karma. For instance, one of the fundamental affliction is the view of the transitory collection. And that's present even when you create virtuous karma. That's why we call the virtuous karma that most of us create now is contaminated karma. Remember contaminated and uncontaminated? Contaminated virtue is the only kind of virtue that we create now. You give something, but you have the conception that there's a real I giving a real donut to a real beggar or a real Starbucks, someone waiting outside the Starbucks store or something like that. All of them, you're conceiving of them as being inherently existent. And although that's the case, so that affliction is there, that klesha is there, it can create virtuous karma. So not all afflictions create negative karma. So let's see where we're going to. So the antidotes of the diverse afflictions, such as desire, such as attachment and hatred and anger and so forth, they have caused their corresponding faults to be eliminated in the sense of being suppressed. So what does that mean? There are, for sort of a medical terminology, when you have a disease, you take a remedy, right? Something to suppress your cough. You take, Robitussin. My earlier days in Philadelphia, people used to take Robitussin to get, not because they had a cough, but they wanted it as a downer or something like that. But anyway, there are remedies to various medical afflictions, right? So in the same kind of terminology, we talk about remedies or antidotes to the afflictions. When attachment is rising in your mind, even though you haven't realized emptiness, which is an ultimate antidote to all the afflictions, you can apply what are called temporal antidotes or temporal remedies to them. You can meditate on the fact that the object that you are attached to is impermanent, that it doesn't bring real pleasure, and so forth. We talked about the various temporal antidotes to the delusions and other talks that we've given. Are you familiar with some of those? Adriana, do you know what I'm talking about? You do? Mm-hmm. Ida, you were in some of our classes, right? Looks like you're in the Grand Canyon there. Okay, so that's what's being talked about here. Through practices explained earlier in this book, the antidotes to the diverse afflictions such as desire have caused their corresponding faults to be eliminated in the sense of being suppressed. That means those temporal antidotes, like to overcome anger, to meditate on loving kindness, to meditate on compassion and so forth. Those are called temporal antidotes. They cause the affliction to be reduced, to be suppressed, or say eliminated only in the sense of them being suppressed. You haven't eliminated anger completely from your mind by meditating on the various, antidotes of anger, patience and loving kindness and so forth. You have eliminated in the sense of suppressing it temporarily. And so if you could bring those temporal antidotes to mind, you're left in a state like having taken the Robitussin if you have the cough. The cough is, the symptoms of the cough are suppressed, but generally, unless you get to the root of the problem, your cough may come back later when the Robitussin wears off, right? Follow what I'm saying? I'm not sure if Robitussin is a good example. Okay. However, all faults were not eliminated. Even if you apply the temporal antidotes to each of the afflictions individually, the Buddha said that there were 84,000 different klesha, 84,000 different afflictions. So there are 84,000 temporal antidotes. Just like, you'll have different, if you have different kinds of, if you have a stomach problem, if you have reflux or something like that, you may take Pepsid, or, if you have pain, you may take aspirin or Bufferin or something. If you have cough, you may take Robitussin. But they have not eliminated, even if you take all of those temporal antidotes, they haven't eliminated all the faults completely. You've only suppressed them. And this is due to not having eliminated the root of all faults, which is ignorance. So sorry, I missed who's had their hand up. Ida, did you have a, yeah, you have a question?
Would the antidote for desire be generosity? What would be the antidote for desire as it is mentioned here?
Okay, so here we have to be careful with terminology. I think you attended some of our courses on mind and mental factors. Generally, desire is not necessarily an affliction. Here, when it's using the word desire, it's more like attachment, an extreme form of desire that has viewed something which you experience as pleasurable. Doesn't mean necessarily viewed only with the eyes, like you're seeing a handsome person or a beautiful woman or something. It can mean tasting something that brings pleasure, chocolate, pizza, hearing something that brings a pleasurable sensation to the ear consciousness, smelling attractive, let's say, odors, perfume or something rather than garbage and excrement. So upon experiencing something which is pleasurable, the mind exaggerates the qualities of that. That's the general characteristic of the mind that still is not realized emptiness. we think, oh, that's good. That's really good. If I had that, I'd always be happy. And so that exaggeration of the desire for something, attributing qualities to it that it does not really have, that exacerbates the situation. That makes the situation worse and creates actual affliction of attachment. So what would be the antidote to, let's say, attachment? Say if one is attached to alcohol, say if one is a budding alcoholic, or one is attached to cigarettes, or one is attached to sexual gratification, or one is attached to food, or, you know, all of the different things one can be attached to look at the situation and recognize that even if you were to get the object wished for, that you desire, it wouldn't bring you real happiness. All it would be is reducing one suffering, replacing it with another. So what is he talking about? You know, say, as Daniel Rohr reminded me at the beginning, I used to use the example of stracciatella gelato, right? In Italy, stracciatella. Even when we were in Switzerland, they said, "Oh, let's get some stracciatella." Delicious gelato, not chocolate chip. It's sort of like slices of chocolate. Like if you take a piece of chocolate with one of those cheese cutters that we have in Switzerland, and you take pieces, you put it in there, just delicious. So my fantasy, you know, of pleasure was to have a swimming pool, refrigerated swimming pool full of stracciatella. But you know, the experience is you take one spoonful, 2 spoonfuls, 3 spoonfuls, you feel some pleasure, but the more that you eat, the more the suffering of stracciatella being in your body, on your tongue and your stomach, starts to increase until you get to the point where you have indigestion and so forth. So the experience of the objects of desire or of attachment are not the experience of real pleasure. There is what the Buddha called changeable suffering. Have you heard that expression? Robert, have you heard that in your Zen teachings, changeable suffering? Robert Lubian? No? So the Buddha talked about 3 kinds of suffering. Obvious suffering, we call suffering of suffering, being stung by a bee or, you know, so forth. Changeable suffering, which is what we ordinarily call happiness, contaminated happiness, contaminated by within one's own mind, the existence of grasping to true existence or grasping to inherent existence. And then all-pervasive compounded suffering, which is merely having a body and mind that are still under the influence of, you know, ignorance and so forth. So it may manifest as a neutral feeling. That's still called suffering, one of the 3 kinds of suffering the Buddha talked about. So in terms of antidotes to attachment, generosity would not necessarily be an antidote to that. But once you had overcome your, say, miserliness, say if you had miserliness, you know, avarice, and you were reluctant to part with things, to develop a mind of giving, seeing the benefits of that can help to overcome temporarily that particular kind of affliction, but it's not a general antidote to attachment in general, okay? So let's continue. So even though you've applied the temporal antidotes to the afflictions, have caused their corresponding faults, that is, the afflictions to be eliminated in the sense of being suppressed. They haven't been eliminated completely. However, all faults were not eliminated and this is due to not having eliminated the root of all the faults, ignorance. So if you really wanted to do, you really wanted to get rid of all of the afflictions, the best thing to do is to realize emptiness, which is the universal antidote to all of the afflictions, the root of all of the afflictions. Ignorance, or another variation of ignorance in general, called the view of the transitory collection. That means grasping to your own self-identity as inherently existent. Overcoming that means realizing emptiness. If you realize emptiness, you've realized that ignorance, you've eliminated that ignorance to some degree. And as you meditate on emptiness again and again, deeper and deeper levels of that ignorance are eliminated from the root, so that that ignorance will never arise again. You attain what's called a true cessation of, these various afflictions. So the text quotes Aryateva's 400 stanzas again, or it's just sometimes just called the 400. Just as the body faculty or body sense power pervades the body. What does that mean? Do you know what that means? Alex, do you know what that means? Body sense power.
It's throughout the body. I guess just throughout the body.
Yeah. So say, for instance, we have different sense faculties. We have an eye sense faculty, which is some subtle matter in the back of the eyeball, a little bit even more subtle than the rods and cones, that acts as an interface between your eye consciousness and the objects of visual perception. We have a ear faculty, not the gross flesh of the ear, but some subtle material within the, what is it called, cochlea of the ear, some subtle fibers, even more subtle than that, that acts as an interface between ear consciousness and audible, phenomena. We have nose faculty, tongue faculty that experiences tastes and so forth. We also have a body faculty that, wherever you press in the body, if you put a needle anywhere in your body, generally, as the body faculty pervades all the body, you experience some suffering. That's not completely the case, right? There's no body faculty in your hairs. In the roots of the hairs, there may be. You pull out the hair, you feel some pain. But if you just cut the hair, unbeknownst, of course, if a child sees the scissors coming toward your hair, they start to cry. But just cutting a hair doesn't cause any problems. Cutting your fingernails, unless you're pulling on them, doesn't cause any suffering, because the body faculty doesn't pervade that. But in general, the body faculty pervades all of the body. So just as the body sense power, or the body faculty, pervades the body, so in the same way, bewilderment, in other words of saying ignorance, abides in all the afflictions as their basis. So what does that mean? Very famous quotation that's mentioned so many different times. So all of the afflictions have as their basis ignorance. They would not arise if we did not have ignorance. They're sort of like the root cause of all of them. Just as the body sense power, the body faculty pervades the body, so bewilderment abides in all the afflictions as their basis. Thus, through overcoming bewilderment, overcoming ignorance, that means realizing emptiness, all afflictions are overcome. Sort of like the cutting off at the root. So say, for instance, you have a poisonous plant in your yard, and you think, oh, this is terrible, I'm going to cut off the branches. Over time, if you haven't really killed a plant completely, some more sprouts will come out, more branches will come out, you'll have more poisonous thorns or whatever. Even if you cut it off at the ground level, right? You use a saw, you cut it off at the base, or use an axe. You hire the tree guys to come down and cut it off. In time, that can still grow again. The only way to really eliminate that is to pull it up from the root, pull out the roots. Because if the roots are still there, they can still, say, talking about a plant or something, they can still absorb moisture and nutrients and so forth. Other sprouts can come up. When dependent, the quotation continues, when dependent arising is seen, this is one way of saying when emptiness is realized. We'll talk more about that relationship between dependent arising and emptiness. When dependent arising is seen, bewilderness does not arise. That is, when you've realized emptiness, ignorance will not arise, the ignorance that grasps to inherent existence. And therefore, as that ignorance is the root of all the afflictions, you will no longer have afflictions. You'll no longer have klesha, no longer have these delusions of anger and attachment and so forth. Therefore, here, with all your effort, with all endeavor, I shall set forth just discourse on this. Is that what your text says? I think I may have revised it from a later translation that Jeffrey gave. So some people translate that as, therefore, you should just listen to the discourse on emptiness. But it seems clear from the commentaries on that verse and in other Buddhist texts that it's referring to the Aryadeva saying he's going to, because this is such an important point, therefore here with all my effort, with all endeavor, I shall set forth just discussion or discourse on this, on how to realize dependent arising, how to realize emptiness. Makes sense so far? Ariana, is it a question?
Yes, it's a little off topic, but so under the premise of dependent arising, how is it that that this ignorance how did it came to be?
How did ignorance come to be?
Yes, I mean,
Okay.
are there any like
Explanations of this.
right?
Yeah, okay. So you might think, what do they say, what in the Garden of Eden, everything was good, perfect. And then what happened? Adam ate the apple or Eve ate the apple, I don't know, something happened. And then everything fell from there. So it's like the original sin or something like that caused the delusions. So from Buddhist point of view, that's not the case. We have had within our mind streams and in our lives in other reincarnations since beginningless time, we have had this kind of ignorance that believes in what we perceive as being findable out there, as being inherently existing. So
is it because of the nature of our own consciousness that the consciousness tends to apprehend what it's perceived as existent or as solid?
So there's one thing at a time. So you say, where did this ignorance come from? One point is that this ignorance that we're trying to eliminate, that could then eliminate all of the other afflictions, attachment, anger, jealousy, pride, low self-esteem, so forth and so on. Where did it come from? It has existed in our minds, our mind streams, since beginningless time. Every life we've had, whether we were a beetle or a goat or a god, a deva realm, or in the hell realms, wherever that ignorance has existed in our mind. Something happened. Something fell over. Oh, you're okay. So that has existed since beginningless time. So what does beginningless time mean? It means that if you trace back, there was an existence before this life. You had, if you were born from a womb or an egg, you had a mother. If you were born in some other way, you still had an existence before that, and before that, and before that. In the same way that we will have a life after this, when we die from this lifetime, maybe we'll be born in hell. Maybe we'll be born as an animal or as a hungry ghost or something, or in the God realm. If we are like most people in the world, probably after this human life, we will revert to something in the lower realms, in hell, or as a hungry ghost, or as an animal, as unpleasant and as uncomplimentary as that might sound. How could I be born as an animal? My next slide. Because we have the seed, we have ignorance in our mind, we have karmic seeds in our mind from that we've created in previous lives. So what is the nature of this ignorance? That's what we're going to be talking about here. You know, this ignorance has existed in our minds since beginningless time. Let me continue a little bit. It is said from the fifth Dalai Lama's text, it is said that just as when a tree is cut from its roots, not just, you know, halfway up or at ground level, but you cut the roots, its branches, all its branches and flowers will wither, right? So, well, I don't know how you can cut the tree. You know, if you cut chunks out of the tree, the branches can still, you know, the sap can still go up. You can have blossoms on the branches, and the flowers and so forth will still be there. But if you cut it from the root, all of the branches and the flowers and the leaves and so forth will wither and disappear. Okay. In that same way, when the conception of inherent existence is uprooted, here the word is sort of extirpated, right? It means to be pulled up from the root, not just a temporary antidote to the conception of inherent existence, but you've eliminated from your mind to some degree. It's not one step. When you realize emptiness, when you realize emptiness directly, let's say, when you have a direct realization of emptiness, at that point, certain kinds of ignorance and delusions are uprooted so that they'll never come back, and all of their manifestations will cease. But not all of the delusions at once. You have to meditate on emptiness again and again, even when you've realized it directly, to completely eliminate ignorance from the mind. It is said that just when a tree is cut from its roots, all its branches and flowers wither. So, in the same way, when the conception of inherent existence is uprooted, is extirpated, all afflictions are extinguished. So it's kind of like the universal elixir. Wait, Ada, keep your hand up. I just want to tell a story first. and those who have visited my house here in North Carolina know that there's a, I take people on a little tour around here. There's across the river, there's a little town, what's it called? Where there was at one time a post office. So it was like non-existent town now, just some old buildings. And I'd ask, I can't remember the name of the town off the top of my head right now, but I wondered what it was because what the origin of the name was. I thought it might have to do with the Great Depression or something like that. It turned out it was a place where an elixir was made by the local general store. You know what elixirs are, you know, in the you know, what was it called? Oh, now it's my old age dementia is coming in. And the name of the town came from that because they said, where are you going? I'm going to the name of this elixir. That was what that was. So, you know, there are various kind of nostrums and so forth that supposedly cured all illnesses. Really, though, the realization of emptiness is a universal elixir that gets rid of all of the afflictions. Okay, Ada, your question.
Yeah, just a comment. I
Yeah.
found a chart on our course of mind and mental factors,
Yeah.
and the antidote for attachment is to meditate on contentment.
Well, that's one of the antidotes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it
one of-
says.
That's one of the antidotes. You know, when your mind is grasping for something, you want to have it just to try to cultivate contentment, to be happy with what you have. So that may be easier said than done when you have a great attachment for you know, as teenager, a boyfriend or a girlfriend or, you know, boy band or something like that. You're just saying, be content. That's not going to cut it. You have to have more reasons. So talking about this, the text continues. Chandrakirti's Madhyamaka Vatara, which Jeffries translates as supplement, chapter 6, which is the chapter on wisdom, says, having seen with the mind that all the faults of the afflictions arise from the view of the transitory collection, the view of the transitory collection as being a inherently existent self, a real self, and having realized that the I, the actual conventionally existent I, the nominally existent I, is its object, a yogi or yogini ceases the self in the sense of an inherently existent person. So some of these are in parentheses, sort of like commentary to make the verse more clear. So what is this talking about? Having seen with the mind, having realized that all of the faults of the afflictions, their arisal, their existence, all their detrimental effects and so forth, all of the faults of the afflictions, the klesha, arise from the view of the transitory collection. It's a basic kind of ignorance, the view of the transitory collection. David, do you remember view of the transitory collection?
It's seeing yourself, all the pieces of yourself.
Yeah, your microphone, I can't hear you well. So we talked about it in our mind and mental language.
No,
So view of the
transitory.
transitory, now we can hear you, okay.
It's seeing all your parts, right? All your parts, all your aggregates, viewing all your aggregates as you.
So not exactly. View of the transitory collection, Paul's a bit of an expert on this. View of the transitory collection according to the highest philosophical school. Well, let's say, start from the beginning. Lower tenets think viewing the aggregates, the collection of parts, the transitory collection. That means the collection of your aggregates, which are change moment by moment, right? viewing them as a permanent self. Some of the tenets, very low tenets, say that's the view of the transitory collection. So view of the transitory collection, or the transitory collection is referring to the 5 aggregates. So what this means is from the highest philosophical point of view, it's a particular kind of ignorance that is in our minds from beginningless time. It's what's called an innate or inborn or connate kind of affliction, something that it doesn't come about because of thinking about things. Oh, maybe this is the person, that is the person. It's something that's innately there, sort of a natural tendency, that this view of the transitory collection views the conventionally existent person, say the conventionally existent David, the conventionally existent Jackie, the conventionally existent Sonny, all of them, all of us exist conventionally in some sense, views that and apprehends it as being inherently existent. Talking about our own self-identity. Not just this, so the view of the transitory collection is not talking about the selflessness of persons in general, you know, in that topic. It's talking about the self of our own person. Even among persons, the view of the transitory collection is only looking at your own identity. So say, for instance, if you are abused, someone says, you're a thief. Say, Hillary, you owe me $5. Suddenly the thought arises, no. At that point, you're not thinking, my body owes you $5, or my discrimination, my compositional factors, or my mind owes you $5. We're thinking I, a sense of I that appears to the mind, and the attributes of that sense of I is that it's existing there from its own side. The affliction that believes that is this basic kind of ignorance, is the view of the transitory collection, viewing the conventionally existent I as being inherently existent. So if it's viewing the conventionally existent I, why is it called the view of the transitory collection? Because the transitory collection are the 5 aggregates, right? It's called the view of the transitory collection because the conventionally existent I exists as an imputation, as a designation upon the 5 aggregates. The conventionally existent I, the conventionally existent Christian, okay. There is a Christian existing. Where are you, Kristen? Remind me, where are you?
I'm in Tampa Bay area.
So Kristen's in Tampa Bay. So if we say, where's Kristen? She's in Tampa Bay. That's legitimate. If we say where, so we give her address. I'm not trying to dox you, don't worry. Give her address and say, oh, she's at 43 so Boulevard. You go there, you know, where you go into the house, you say, where's Kristen? She's on the 2nd floor, you go on the 2nd floor in that room. All of that is legitimately looking for the conventionally existent Kristen. But when you see Kristen's body or hear her speak, even if you don't see her, there is the idea that there is a Kristen, you know, you're not satisfied with just saying that's Kristen. There is a basic kind of ignorance that believes that there is a Christian existing within her 5 aggregates. A real Christian existing from her own side, not just a Christian that's labeled to her 5 aggregates. That's called the nominally existent or conventionally existent or imputedly existent Christian. That's a Christian that does legitimately exist, because who is, we say Daniel's in Padua. I'm not sure where Michael is. Lobsang Tendrils somewhere. We can say that they conventionally exist. But the mind having perceived a conventionally existent person, having given a name, Lana or Snehi or something, the mind grasps, it appears to the mind that is existing from its own side. That's a basic kind of fault of our minds since beginningless time. Having seen with the mind that all the faults of the afflictions arise from the view of the transitory collection, and having realized that the nominally existent, conventionally existent I is its object, a yogi ceases the self in the sense of an inherently existent person. So the aim is to realize this process. You realize in your own mind that your own self-identity, a subtle kind of self-identity, not one that's brought about by thinking I'm smart, I'm beautiful, I'm slim, I've got washboard abs or whatever, I'm terrible, I'm incorrigible, I'm a lost cause, whatever kinds of conceptions one has about oneself. Not talking about that. An innate sense of one's own self-identity that is always there, but because it's not very clear, because it's so many other things are going on in our mind, we don't perceive how we are thinking of ourselves. Nagarjuna's precious garland, the text continues, verse 35 says, as long as there is a conception of the aggregates as inherently existent, he says the mental and physical aggregates, the 5 aggregates, right? As long as there is conception of the aggregates is inherently existent, just so long is there a conception of the I as inherently existent. Further, when the conception of an I exists, there is action. That means contaminated action. As long as you believe that there's an inherently existent I, you create contaminated karma, which brings about generally suffering, but sometimes virtue. All of our virtuous actions right now are contaminated by that belief in an inherently existent I. When the conception of an I exists, there is contaminated action. From contaminated action, there's also birth. So the root cause of rebirth, the karmic seeds that we leave in our mind from contaminated negative actions and even contaminated virtuous actions. The reason we're born as a human this lifetime is we created contaminated virtue in the past to be born as a human. We observed morality, we practiced generosity, maybe some of the other perfections. We made prayers in some way to be born as a human again. So because of contaminated actions, there is birth. So these 2 verses almost sound like they're talking about, well, let's say 2 verses. Here we said before that the selflessness of persons is overcome before the selflessness of phenomena, right? In the sense of practice. That's where you have your first experience of selflessness. an experience or a taste or realization of the selflessness of your own personal identity, not the selflessness of some other person, but your own, because the way that the I appears to your own mind can become very vivid. Let's continue. The king of doctrine. So in the Gelugpa tradition, if you ask Sakya or Nyingma or someone else who the king of doctrine is, they wouldn't say Tsongkhapa, but Tsongkhapa is the founder of the Gelugpa tradition. So the Gelugpas would say the king of doctrine, Tsongkhapa, petitioned, requested Manjushri for teaching. And in just the way that Manjushri taught him, so you know who Manjushri is, right? Michael, do you know who Manjushri is or was or is?
He's the Buddha of stainless wisdom.
Yeah, there's a Buddha of stainless wisdom, also Bodhisattva of stainless wisdom. So there's a Manjushri appearing as a 10th level Bodhisattva. But generally, as you say, Manjushri is, let's say, the definitive Manjushri, actual Manjushri, is the wisdom that realizes emptiness directly. The interpretive or interpretable Manjushri is a deity that appears as a youthful Bodhisattva, maybe holding a sword in his right hand, that the sword of wisdom that cuts through confusion, and holding the Prajna Paramita text, or the stem of a lotus upon which the Prajna Paramita, the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, is placed. That's called the interpretable. That's usually what we think of Manjushri, some kind of person or deity. Actual definitive Manjushri is the wisdom that realizes emptiness. So Lama Tsongkhapa from his youth, there's, Hillary has a picture of the youthful Manjushri there. Do you see in the second row, Hillary Dilram? There's Manjushri holding a sword of wisdom in his right hand and holding the stem of an upala flower upon which there's the Prajna Paramita text. Sometimes in some versions, he actually holding the text in his fingers of his left hand. So from very youthful time, because of karmic imprints from previous lifetimes, Lama Tsongkhapa had a vision, actual vision of Manjushri. So the Buddha's omniscient wisdom can appear as this deity to individuals. Lama Tsongkhapa had a karmic connection with them, and at some point he was actually able to communicate with Manjushri. So rather than writing emails to George, asking questions or something, you could actually ask the authority. You could actually ask he could actually ask Manjushri. So he petitioned Manjushri for teaching, asked him to teach him about emptiness. And just in the way that Manjushri taught him, Lama Tsongkhapa actualized in his mental continuum, in his mind, the means of generating the correct view of emptiness. So how do you generate that correct view of emptiness? How do you realize emptiness? That's something that Manjushri taught Lama Tsongkhapa, besides all of the great books that Lama Tsongkhapa studied and read, but he actually got authoritative advice how to do this. In the transmissions of his instructions to his students, the Lama Tsongkhapa's students, after he realized and he taught emptiness to others, the ascertainment of the two selflessnesses appears in diverse forms. So he presented the procedures to how to realize emptiness to his students in various ways according to their temperaments and so forth. In the transmission from Kedrup Gelek Palsang, you know who that is? Paul, you know who that is, right? Who is that?
Kedrup was one of the two main students of Tsongkhapa.
Right.
And actually, George, did you know he's actually the one who is, quote unquote, the first Panchen Lama? He's the
Right, I
first
was just going to
one.
mention that. So he was, originally he was a Sakya student. Snehi, you study with Sakya, right? Right. Originally he was a student of the Sakya, particularly of Rendawa Shinoludro, who was very close teacher of Lama Tsongkhapa at the beginning, one of Lama Tsongkhapa's teachers. And Kejub Dre, as he was later called, here is just called Kejub Gelek Pelsangbo. So he wanted to study with Lama Tsongkhapa. When he was very young, he came to Lama Tsongkhapa when he was 23 after having studied with Rendawa, who was this great Sakya Lama. I'm just curious, Snehi, have you heard of Rendawa in the Sakya studies?
No, I mean, I know who he is, but I don't recall like studying his view of emptiness.
Okay, so he was a great Sakya Lama, contemporary, a little bit older than Lama Tsongkhapa. So Kejub went, after having studied in the Sakya, he went to see Lama Tsongkhapa and was sitting on the, at the discourse, and he thought, oh, I know as much as this guy. And he got up on the throne where Lama Tsongkhapa was sitting, as though with some kind of pride and arrogance. And as he, thinking that he was equivalent to Lama Tsongkhapa. And very shortly thereafter, as Lama Tsongkhapa acceded to that, let him sit there. And very quickly he realized that Lama Tsongkhapa knew much more than he did. And so he got off the throne and sat at his feet, became one of his major disciples, the other one being Gyaltsab. So that's who this when it's talking about Kejub Gelek Palsang, you might think, who is that? Some random Lama. So it was one of the, in Lama Tsongkhapa's rendition up here in the merit field up there, on either side of him, one side is Kejub J, this Kejub Gelek Palsangbo, and on the other side is Gyaltsab J, the two main disciples. Just like the Buddha had Shariputra and Mahamoggallana as his two main disciples. It's said that many of the Buddhas will have two main disciples. Kejub was the third Gandhantipa, the third, after Lama Tsongkhapa was the throne holder of the Ganden tradition. He passed on the lineage to Gyaltsab, who was the older of his two disciples. And then at a certain point, in 1431, when he was 47, he was appointed to be the Gandhantipa, the throne holder of the Gelugpa tradition. And he was at the age of 53, he died and was posthumously given the title of the first Panchen Lama, as Paul pointed out. So we were talking about the fourth Panchen Lama earlier, who had recognized the fifth Dalai Lama, had identified him. After he was given the title of the fifth Dalai Lama, previous incarnations were recognized, and Kejub was recognized as the first Panchen Lama. So anyway, that's who he is. So in the transmission from Kejub, the instructions are given from the point of view of preparation and actual meditation on emptiness. So what that means is Lama Tsongkhapa gave many presentations of how to realize emptiness to different disciples. The main one was proliferated by Kejub, talks about the four essentials, which we're going to be talking about, the four essential points. Preparation and actual meditation on emptiness. In the transmission from Kejub Sherab Senge, was another one of the Dalai Lama's, one of Lama Tsongkhapa's disciples. He was more or less the same time as Kedrupje and Lama Tsongkhapa. He was a disciple of Lama Tsongkhapa. He was an author of a book, a text called the Song of the Four Mindfulnesses. Have any of you heard of that? Georgina, you've heard of that?
It's published in one edition of the
Routledge Press.
Precious Garland, I think.
Yeah. So there was that same series, there was a Precious Garland, was one volume. There was another volume, The Key to the Middle Way and the Song of Four Mindfulnesses. This was a text written by this Lama, Kedrup Sherab Senge. So he was the founder of Gyume Tantric College, which maybe some of you have heard of, one of the two tantric colleges of the Gelugpa tradition in Lhasa. And I won't read you the text. It's very short. They're you can look up Lama Tsongkhapa, Lama Sopa Rinpoche translated it. Glenn Mullen has a translation. You can look up on Google the Song of the Four Mindfulnesses. So the four mindfulnesses are mindfulness of the guru, of your own guru, mindfulness of bodhicitta, of aspiring to highest enlightenment for the sake of sentient beings, mindfulness of one's own body as the yidam, sort of tantric realization. So Robert was asking a little bit about, Tantra, and the mindfulness of emptiness. So in there, he had his own presentation of this. So we're not going to be talking about that so much, but no matter which of these is performed, there is no difference to realize emptiness, he says. Here, since there is an occasion of instructions for practicing the perfection of wisdom in the stages of the path to highest enlightenment, the preparatory practices have appeared in the series of practices discussed earlier. Excuse me. So sometimes when you talk about preparatory practices, you might think in Tantra, you make 100,000 prostrations or 100,000 refuges. You're just not talking about that. This is talking about the preparation to realize emptiness. Okay, so that means following the stages of the path from, recognizing the value of the life of leisure and endowment that we have, its impermanence, death and rebirth and so forth, karma, the suffering of all of samsara and so forth. Therefore, they are dispensed with now. So that means you're expected to have some familiarity with the practices of the person of beginning and intermediate scope. The actual practice of the perfection of wisdom has two parts: the practice of the selflessness of persons and the practice of the selflessness of other phenomena. Okay, so now we're getting to the nitty-gritty. The practice of the selflessness of persons. We'll just get a little introduction today. With respect to the first, selflessness of persons, there are many forms. For instance, the reasoning of dependent arising has 3 essentials, and the sevenfold reasoning has 9 essentials, and so forth. They are explained extensively in the scriptures of the great being, the Master Lama Tsongkhapa, in his great exposition of special insight and his small exposition of special insight. So what is this talking about? There are many reasonings that one can use to establish emptiness. Some of the most famous, perhaps the most famous, is called the reason of dependent arising. this, to understand what that means, almost you have to study some of the other reasonings to be able to establish this. The reasoning of dependent arising would mean that having identified the object of negation, that you're trying to negate the appearance of an inherently existent person, simply by recognizing that it is that the person that does exist, the conventionally existent person, is a dependent arising. That means it arises in dependence upon a basis of designation, 5 aggregates, a mind that apprehends those, recognizes those, and gives the name, David or Hillary or Jennifer or whatever to those 5 aggregates. That's the person that does exist. And the appearance to the mind of the inherently existent I is one that does not appear like that. So you can negate that inherently existent I that way. You could realize emptiness that way. We're not going to be talking about so much of that now. In the course that Shantideva Center has graciously thought to host later this year, that maybe a long course on Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary on wisdom called Gompa Rapsal. All of those kind of things will be gone into detail, great detail. So it says, and the sevenfold reasoning has 9 essentials. So what is the sevenfold reasoning? That is talking about the person is not one with the aggregates, not different than the aggregates, is not the form of the aggregates. There's 7 different kinds of analyses that's done. And that's more detail than we're going to be going into right now also. In the instructions of the practice transmitting from mouth to mouth the experience of the omniscient bearer of the chariot of this system, Lobsang Gyatso, and his sons, we find an analysis based on 4 essentials. So not 3 essentials, not 7 essentials, 4 essentials. So this is what you'll find in most introductory texts on the Lan Rim when you introduce a meditation on emptiness, talking about the 4 essential points. So who was Lobsang Gyatso? Lobsang Gyatso, Kedop Lobsang Gyatso was a student of the first Dalai Lama. So this is before, our text is written by the 5th Dalai Lama, right? So he was some generations before that. And a principal teacher of the 2nd Dalai Lama. He was a disciple, I think, also of Lama Tsongkhapa, but he was especially disciple of the 1st Dalai Lama. He was counted as the 57th holder of the Lan Rim transmission lineage. So those of you who know about the Lan Rim, there are various holders of the Lan Rim tradition. So he was the 57th holder of that. So very famous Lama. And he said, the first essential is to ascertain the way an innate conceiver of the I conceives I. So I'm just going to mention a couple of words here, and then we're going to end with dedication and have time for questions. So what does it mean, innate conceiver? When we talk about different kinds of delusions or klesha, some of them are innate, some of them are formed through our own philosophical views. You could say intellectually created or whatever. Like say if you say, who am I? I say, oh, I'm George, I am a man, I studied science, or I did this or that, different kinds of conceptions of who you are. Those are intellectually formed conceptions of the self. But an innate conception of the self is one that has not any philosophical foundations. It's something that is in our mind as a residue from past lifetimes. Different people have translated this term. It's in Tibetan, we say lenke, born together, you could say, or in Sanskrit, sahaja. Saha means together, ja means born. Some people translate it as innate. So it's born with you, like when you talk innate wisdom, something that you have from birth without having to study any kind of books. Some people translate it as connate. And that's literally possibly right, but it never quite resonates with me as much. Innate. The first essential is to ascertain the way an innate conceiver of I conceives I. The innate grasping to the I. Here it says conceives the I. So when it's saying conceives the I, that means it's not talking about the I that's the conventionally existent I. It's this concept or grasping to an I that seems to be inherently existent. The first essential is to ascertain the way that this innate grasping to the I, how it conceives of the I. What that means is you have to calm your mind, because this appearance of the inherent existent I to the mind is very, very, it can be quite strong, but generally in everyday life, it's kind of like below the noise level of the other things in our mind. One at the beginning has to instigate the appearance of this I, and then apprehend with the corner of your mind how your mind is reacting to that appearance. You know, the example I've given of Santa Claus, right? Do you have in Switzerland and Italy, Daniel, did you have Santa Claus, or is it something?
Yeah, in Switzerland, but in Italy, they don't really.
Was it called, what did you call in Switzerland, Santa Claus?
Weihnachtsmann.
I didn't catch that. What is it?
Santa Claus.
Weihnachtsmann. Okay.
German is quite a harsh language.
Yeah, I think. So Daniel is coming down the steps when Lawrence was a little baby, maybe dressed as Santa Claus. His son, Lawrence, may have been excited, didn't recognize that it was Dad because he had a beard and red suit. I don't know if you ever did that, but let's say you did. There is a sort of apprehension of Santa Claus out there, right? The first essential is to ascertain the way an innate conceiver of the I conceives I. So we're going to stop there right now. And what was it, Sheila? Who was it? Put up the dedication prayers. And then I will remain for some time if you want to ask some questions. Due to the virtues, remember it's not, here it says gewadihi, it's not the merits, because merit would only mean the collection of, accumulation of the collection of merit. Due to the virtues, due to these virtues, gewadihi, due to these virtues, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead each and every sentient being, without exception, into that enlightened state. So what that means is to recognize that during this period, this evening, we have created some virtuous karma, that it will necessarily ripen within cyclic existence if it isn't destroyed by anger or something in the future, and that we can cause it to ripen in a particular way by our aspiration, by our prayer, by our dedication. May this virtue that I've created, these virtues, do due to them, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha. That means a Buddha in the sense of being a guru, and that is able to teach and help sentient beings. And as a result of that, lead all sentient beings, all living beings without exception, into that very enlightened state. And then the prayer for bodhicitta, maybe move it up just a little bit. May the supreme precious bodhicitta that has not arisen in my mind stream as of now, may it arise and grow, and may that which has already arisen, whatever insights I have into bodhicitta, may they not diminish, but increase more and more. So you can use this as kind of a dedication, although that prayer is actually just a prayer, not a dedication. You can think, due to these merits, may the precious bodhicitta that has not arisen in my mind, may it take root, and may that which has arisen not decrease, but increase evermore. Okay, so open for questions. Those of you who have other obligations, as we just passed 8:30 on the East Coast here, don't feel shy if you have some other things you have to do, but I will remain for some time. Anyone have some question? Maybe nothing tonight. Oh, someone had, oh, okay. Hong King, oh, from Singapore, right? I haven't seen you in a long time. Nice field of flowers there. So Pung King, what's your question? Must be very late there. Oh, maybe it's morning, very early. You have to unmute. There's something on the bottom of your screen, on the left side, maybe. I don't know if you're using a Macintosh or not. Okay, while you're trying to figure that out, I'll let Jennifer, you try to figure out somewhere on, oh, there you go.
I've got it, I've got it. So
okay, yeah.
Really, truly wonderful to receive your teaching again, really happy. Thank you for your teaching, thank you.
So it's like what, 8:30 in the morning there, right? Singapore.
Yeah, it's 8:30 in 8:30 something in Singapore, yeah.
Yeah, so what's your question?
Yeah, okay, my question today is that regarding the emptiness of a self as to phenomena, the emptiness of self. Right. We talk about the cause selfness as a person, like permanent, unitary, independent self, and then you have the self-sufficient, substantial, existent self, or autonomous, substantial self.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. I would like to, I would be grateful if you can explain what is exactly means by autonomous, substantial, existent self.
Okay, so what Pung King is talking about here, when we talk about the various philosophical views, let's say from the Theravada, we usually say the Shravakalyana, the Pratika Buddhayana, generally of the various philosophical schools of the Hinayana. There were 18 schools of the Vaibhashika. There were also the Sautrantika school. They all had slightly different ideas of what the Buddha meant when he talked about selflessness. The grossest of those is the sense that the person or the self is permanent, will exist forever, partless. It's not something that has individual parts and is independent, has its own autonomy. That is the kind of conception of a self like that is one which the higher schools say has no innate analog. There's no innate conception of the person being permanent, partless, and independent. Okay, that's the grossest kind. If there is that conception, that's come about because of various kinds of indoctrination one has had. Let's say, if one is a Christian, you know, that God is permanent and partless and independent, you know, can do what he wants, anything he wants, doesn't matter. Or in the Hindu tradition, you know, of the Hindu deities, more subtle kind of self, which is accepted not only by the Sautrantika, some of the Vaibhashikas, some of the Sautrantikas, even Chittamatra and some, say, Svatantrika Madhyamakas, is that the person is, there is a conception of the person as being self-supporting in the sense of being substantially existent. So it's said that there is an innate conception of that kind of self, but that's not the self that we're dealing with here. That's still called the gross self of persons. Realizing its absence, self-supporting, substantially existent person, would not lead to your ceasing any of the delusions. It would not lead to nirvana, right? According to the highest philosophical view. So your question was more about, you were talking about autonomous. That means talking about the grossest kind of self view of the self, Boon King?
My question is this, self-sufficient, substantially existent self. Yeah. If we just generally say that, you know, we got to depend on food and drink, education, and so on for, you know, that kind of self-sufficient. But that would be a little, to me, a little confusing, as in compared to the independent, you know, permanent, unitary, independent. The word independent relating to, so it's more or less, you know, a bit overlap, and which I don't quite, I'm not so clear about this. And right. And other version that I hear of is that such self-sufficient, or in other words, autonomous, substantial self, is like when you see a house in front of a house, then I would say, oh, this is a house. But I actually have not seen anything inside the house. Yeah, but I just label it, oh, this is a house, you know? I
don't think that's what's meant there. So when you use the word autonomous, that sounds more like independent of the grossest kind. So let's leave off the word autonomous. Usually when you talk about self-supporting, substantially existent person, it's a substantially existent person in the sense that there seems to be, to our mind, a substance of person. That substance of person, you might say, oh, that sounds like the inherently existent person. Yeah. This substance of person seems to be something that doesn't have to be labeled, right? For instance, when we talk about two kinds of phenomena: substantially existent phenomena and imputedly existent phenomena, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This is not talking from the Prasangika point of view. This is talking about from a slightly lower point of view. Mm-hmm. So substantially existent person would be one that doesn't depend on its existence of being imputed. Like, say, for instance, I see. I don't have so rosary, say, or a garland of flowers, or rosary. A rosary is something that is said to be imputedly existent. Why is that? Because in dependence upon its parts, the maybe 108 beads or whatever, string, and being tied in a certain way, in dependence on that, you can impute the rosary. Simply seeing one bead, you don't generally say you saw the rosary. Same way, an army. a collection of troops. I'm not trying to be militaristic. This is just one of the examples that was used in the scriptures. So I said, why is he talking about armies? We're fighting with Russia right now. So an army is an imputedly existent phenomena. Say, for instance, you see a soldier coming through your town, stealing food from your house, like is going on in Ukraine right now or something like that. You don't say you saw the army, you just saw a soldier. If you see a collection of soldiers, you can impute army. So there is a sense of the self as being substantially existent. So the opposite of imputedly existent in this grosser vision is something which is substantially existent. It's just perceiving the substance of that, you perceive the thing, like seeing the flower, according to the lower tenets, even though for Prasangika, the flower has parts. Here they're not talking about that. There's a substance of flower, there's a substance of soldier. They are substantially existent. So you don't have to depend upon apprehending a collection of parts for that. Okay, let's leave it there because it's getting into more subtle point. And you write me an email. You know my email address. You write me an email with more questions. Okay, Jennifer, you have a question.
Yes, thank you, Venerable George. Regarding the 6 root delusions, what is the difference between ignorance and the afflicted view of the transitory collections?
Right. So both of them apprehend their referent object, the thing that they're thinking about. They both apprehend them as being inherently existent. When you talk about ignorance in general of the 6 root delusions, that would include the ignorance that conceives of the inherent existence of phenomena. It would include the ignorance that conceives of inherently existent of other persons besides yourself. And it would include the ignorance that grasps to the self of your own personal identity in general. Whereas the view of the transitory collection is just taking one of those. It views, the view of the transitory collection views your own personal identity. It apprehends, say, it takes as a referent object the conventional self, the conventional Jennifer. And it apprehends that, it conceives of that as being inherently existent. So there is no inherent existence in the conventionally existent Jennifer, but because of imprints from beginningless time in our mind stream, when we do apprehend the conventional Jennifer, it appears that the conventionally existent Jennifer, even though it's just imputed by our mind from our side onto her aggregates, it appears as though Jennifer is existing from her own side. Believing in that is called the view of the transitory collection. So it only refers to the selflessness of your own personal identity, whereas ignorance in general is grasping to the inherent existence of other phenomena, the 5 aggregates, for instance, trees, books, my MacBook, my old car, and persons. And I think it also includes in general, would include conceiving of one's own self-identity as being inherently existent. And generally, it's an ignorance that grasps to phenomena as being inherently existent.
Thank you. And so, yes, no, thank you. So then categorically, the view of the transitory aggregates is a subset of the ignorance. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes, you could say that. It is called an afflicted view, whereas ignorance is called an afflicted non-view. So there's a slight difference there. One is called a view, the view of the transitory collection, and ignorance is called non-view. So when you talk about the 6 afflictions, so the first 5 are called the 5 afflicted non-views. And the 6th afflicted view has 5 varieties, a view of the transitory collection and so forth. There are 5 different ones. Those are all called views. So there's a slight difference there, which I will try to ferret out for us next time, okay?
Thank you.
Yeah. So, Barbara, you have your nice cat there. Anyone else have a question?
She's a bit insistent sometimes.
Oh, yeah? Yeah. Cats, certainly they have their own view of the transitory collection, right? They view their own self as being inherently existent. Anyone else have a question? How are we doing? Georgine.
Yes, so Venerable George, if you don't mind going back to what I was beginning to ask you before the session began.
Yeah. Remind me.
About a discussion group that is looking for material on the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras that would include commentary and/or recommendations for practice. Now, we've just finished discussing His Holiness's book on the Heart Sutra.
Okay.
But would you have any further recommendations beyond that?
Well, Barbara's putting up a book there, Echoes of Voidness, right? I guess she wrapped in. I don't know if it's still being published. So in that, I guess she wrapped in had a commentary on the Heart Sutra and on Mahamudra. And what's the third part, Barbara? The 3 parts.
Can't remember.
Yeah. So in there, that's talking about how to apply meditation on emptiness into practice also. But in general, even up till now, in our course now, we've been talking sort of like in general about philosophical things. But when we get into the selflessness of persons and we start to recognize that it's not just enough to understand it intellectually, you have to meditate on that, you have to practice. So from next session on, the 4th session on, we'll be spending more time on talking about how to practice that. But I think most expositions on emptiness, on the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, let's say the Heart Sutra is one of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, right? There's 3 Perfection of Wisdom Sutras that I talked about before: the 8,000 verse Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, the 25,000 verse Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, the 100,000 verse Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, that are all expositions of one discourse that the Buddha gave on Vulture's Peak. Those are the ones that are mainly studied in the monastic education. But there are other Perfection of Wisdom Sutras that the Buddha taught. I can't remember, maybe some of them are even lost to us. So it's hard to say an exact number. There are something like 20 or more Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. So if you just see the translations of those or commentaries on those, they might try to explain what is meant. But what you're talking about is the actual practice of those. So that's starting to get a little bit difficult because, there are people who write commentaries on these. I've seen commentaries to the Heart Sutra that are just, talking about practice or something that just off the wall. They don't have any kind of lineage behind them, any kind of explanation that had come down from the time of the Buddha. So you have to be very careful when you talk about practice. In the Gelugpa tradition, in the Sakya tradition, in the Khargyu tradition, in the Nyingma tradition, the commentaries are very authoritative, and the explanation of how to meditate on them in their own traditions can be relied on. So it's better not to rely on someone who's just giving their own interpretation of those things. So there's not much more I can say in terms of recommendations right off the top of my head.
I have just read about and have ordered His Holiness's book called Practicing Wisdom. Is that one that you could recommend in this regard?
Oh, and if it was actually, penned by the Dalai Lama or his commentary, yes, there are sometimes they say something is by the Dalai Lama and it's some author's own take on that. But if that's actually the Dalai Lama's teachings, definitely can recommend that.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So anyone else? Oh, Minto is here also from San Francisco. We got all over the world, from Singapore to Washington State. I think we had Australia there earlier, somewhere else. Anyone else have a question? Robert? Yes.
I was just going to point out to Georgina that His Holiness's book, Practicing Wisdom, is actually a commentary on Shantideva. It's not actually on the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras.
Okay.
Ah, yes, good point. I didn't know that particular title. Thanks for that, Paul. Robert Lupien had written me an email. Robert, do you have any question? You're joining us for the first time tonight.
No, thank you for your teaching this evening.
Yeah, thanks for coming. I'll be getting back to you about some of the questions you asked in your email a little later. Yeah. So anything else? You're all dried up? Dried up with questions? Okay, so let's stop here. As I mentioned before, it's good to reread the text again and again. And some of the things that are mentioned at the beginning, with this knowledge of what we've gotten up to now, will become more clear. I'd given the mistaken attribution last time of Newton having read the Principia Mathematica. Actually, he wrote one text by that title. What I was thinking of at the time, I mentioned to John Landau afterwards, is he had read Descartes' Geometry, famous text that was sort of like the encyclopedic. And I quoted to John some quotations where he said he read a few pages, didn't understand anything, read again, understand a little bit more. And so it's kind of like that as you go back over this material again and again, I think things will become more and more clear. So thank you for your participation, and hope to see you again next week. Take care.
Thank you, Venerable George.
Thank you, Venerable George.
Thank you for attending. Take care, guys.
Thank you so much.
Much.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sunny.
Thanks, Sunny.
Take care, everyone.